So in this video, we're still in chapter 10, but we're talking about developmental research designs. So designs that are typically used in developmental research. This table here shows you the three main types that we're going to talk about: longitudinal, cross-sectional, and sequential. And so we're going to come back and talk about each of these definitions on individual slides, but I just wanted to show you this is a nice place to kind of come and compare and contrast the different studies. So a longitudinal study, it measures the same group of individuals at different times, or it's taking a single cohort and observing them over time. So a good example is that project Primer I worked on. So the way I described it to you for the most part was just a year-long study where it was kind of a pre-test, post-test between subject study, right? Where we measured their cognitive scores before and after the intervention, and then we had that early literacy intervention. Well, we also came back and then looked at those individuals. So let's say here is age 3. We studied those individuals, and that's when they were done with that intervention. Then we came back after they were in elementary school and looked at those cognitive outcomes, and then again when they were all aged 11. So we're following that same group of individuals over time. It's the same cohort, studying them over time. Here's a different example. So this study, the title actually read, Math Skills at Age 7 Predict How Much Money You'll Make. Wouldn't that be great? You go back and look at your math skills for when you're age 7 and see how much money you're going to make at age 42. And so according to the summary, researchers measured kids' IQ, math skills, reading skills, socioeconomic status at age 7, and then came back when they were 42 in the same group of individuals and measured their income. And supposedly there was some sort of relationship. So it's only one. A lot of times your longitudinal study will measure those individuals over time, several different time spots. This isn't an example of that. But again, the idea is that they're studying them over time. So hopefully that will help you see some of the advantages and disadvantages of these studies. So one of the things, if you think about it, for measuring something over time, is that we can really look and identify patterns and individual differences that we might see. So that's one of those benefits of these longitudinal studies. In addition, because we're measuring things over time, we can look at early events and later events and see if there's a relationship between those things. And we only have one cohort, so it's one group of individuals, and this word cohort is going to come up a lot in this video, where we have people that were born at a particular time, either it's a year or a decade, but they have some similarities because of their time of birth. Now, a disadvantage is, think about it, measuring these children at age 7 and age 42, or Project Primer, going from age 3 and trying to find them again at age 11. That's really time consuming, right? And it takes a lot of time. And so, it could be years before your data gets published. Also, for considering, we're studying these individuals over time, I think I already mentioned that just in that 1 year where I did my intervention, we had a huge dropout rate. Okay, imagine trying to study them for 7 more years or 35 more years. And since we only have one cohort, the results may only generalize to that cohort. So that's another disadvantage. Now, a cross-sectional study is where we have different groups that are studied at the same time. And again, because developmental research is interested in changes that occur with age, most of the time those different groups are going to be different ages. So these are going to study differences in the variable of interest, again, because developmental research, interested in age, a lot of times that's going to be age. The participants are different, so it's not the same group of individuals, and they're studied at one time point. So here, just for example, in March 2019, maybe I studied individuals that were age 1, age 2, and whatever other ages I wanted, 3, 4, and 5, and I measured them in some variable of interest to see how they differed, whether it was their ability to reason or comprehension of language or something else that developmental psychologists might be interested in. Another example, think instead of age 1, 2, and 3, maybe it's 20, 40, and 60-year-olds. such as looking at the ability to learn a computer application, and then how that actually changes as individuals get older. Here's just another way of looking at that. I'm just showing you again here we have 4-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 12-year-olds, and 16-year-olds. They're all measured in here in 2002. So that means we have 1, 2, 3, 4 cohorts all measured at the same time. Here's another example. This study examined changes in moral development from ages 3 to 5. So it didn't follow 3-year-olds for 3 years. It actually, in 2014, it looked at their moral development scale scores and looked at 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds all at the same time, one snapshot in time. So how many cohorts do you see here? Yes, 3. So, of course, we have advantages and disadvantages here as well. So, what do you see? I mean, if you think about a longitudinal study that takes a long period of time, what advantage does a cross-sectional study have over that? More efficient, and you don't need that long-term cooperation. You don't have to hope that people will stay in your study because you're just measuring them at one snapshot in time. Now, a disadvantage is that you can't study those trends. If you're studying just 3 groups of individuals, 2 groups of individuals at one snapshot in time, if you're studying 3 groups of individuals at one snapshot in time, you can't study trends. You can't look at age-related trends. Also, you have 3 different cohorts, so you could end up with what's called a cohort effect. And this is when people that are born at a particular time, whether it's a year or a decade, they share various characteristics. So that's what this just says here. Cohort effects when people born at a particular time share various characteristics. So looking at this was our example of our cross-sectional study. We looked at the MDS scores for 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds in 2014. How could we make this a longitudinal study? If we just took these 3-year-old scores and we measured them over time. We measured them as 2014, 2015, and 2016. But again, we see the strengths and the weaknesses of both. So that's what this is showing you here, 2014, 15, and then 16. That would make it longitudinal in nature. So note here that this is the same group of individuals. So sequential design is a combination of those cross-sectional longitudinal studies. And you can see here that it's taking a group of individuals that was 20 in 1945, and it's studying them every 10 years. So this is a longitudinal sequence. However, every 10 years, it also adds in another group of individuals. So it says another group of individuals at 20, 30, and 40, another group of individuals at 20, 30, and 40. So here you have cross-sectional. So it allows it to kind of control for some of those things that are wrong with, or the disadvantages of your cross-sectional and longitudinal studies, but gets the advantages of both of those as well. So here's an example. This was actually a study that was going on when I was at USC, and I was kind of on the fringe part of it because I was part of this interdisciplinary training grant that was funded through this project. And it was called the Longitudinal Study of Generations. And it's kind of a classic example of a sequential design. And so basically they started the experiment in 1971. They had 300 3-generation California families, which included grandparents that were in their 60s, middle-aged parents that were in their 40s, and grandchildren that were aged 15 to 26. So far it sounds like a cross-sectional study, right? In 1971, we looked at these 3 individuals. But then what they did is they continued to look at them, or I guess I should ask, you think about it first. What could they have done to make it sequential? So right now it's cross-sectional. Yeah, they needed to follow them over time. So basically what they did is for these 3 groups, they collected data at each of these time points from 1971 to 2013. Some of them are evenly spaced out, some of them not so much. And basically, then they also added in a fourth generation in 1991. And so this is a fully elaborated generation sequential design that allows comparisons of sets of aging parents and children at the same time of life, but also during historical periods. These comparisons make possible the investigation of effects of social change on intergenerational solidarity or conflict across 35 years and 4 generations, the effect of social change on the ability of families to buffer stressful life situations, aging, divorce, remarriage, higher female labor force participation, changes in work and the economy, a possible weakening of family norms, and the effects of social change on the transmission of values, resources, and behaviors. So this was a giant study that was funded for a very long period of time that allowed us to study these various things. Again, across in a single cohort changes over time, but also looking at that cross-sectional, comparing cohorts at an individual time. So let's think about this study that we've also mentioned before. So we looked at 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 5-year-olds taking their MDS score at the same time. How can we make this a sequential study? We could follow these individuals over time. So those 3-year-olds not only have 3, 4, and 5-year-olds in 2014, but come back and look at them in 2015 and 2016. So obviously we're going to have some advantages and disadvantages. The advantages is that you can determine if a cohort effect is truly present. So what would you need to see in the longitudinal sample to know if there was no cohort effect? You saw the same effects in all 3 longitudinal samples, then that means there's no cohort effect. So if you saw the same trends, the same changes in your grandparents, your parents, and your children over time, then there wouldn't be necessarily a cohort effect.